Hello and welcome to another episode of EKU Online's eCast series. EKU Online's mission is to change lives by providing access to affordable and high-quality degree programs in meaningful disciplines that positively impact our society. We thank you for joining us. Today, our guest is Dr. Michelle Gremp, who serves as Associate Professor in the College of Education and as coordinator of the Education of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program. She is also the Special Education Graduate Coordinator. Dr. Gremp received her doctorate in Speech and Hearing Sciences from Washington University in St. Louis. Prior to joining EKU, Dr. Gremp worked as a research associate for the Center on Literacy and Deafness at Georgia State University. She also worked as the education coordinator at Central Institute for the Deaf and as the Deaf Education Practicum Coordinator for the Washington University School of Medicine program in Audiology and Communication Sciences. And finally, she's worked as a teacher of the deaf. Welcome, Dr. Gremp, and thank you so much for your time today. We sincerely appreciate it.
Thanks. It's nice to be here, Steve.
Well, let's jump right in. Because of the special nature of your discipline, can we begin by defining some terms that perhaps many of us use interchangeably, but perhaps incorrectly? If you would, please define for us terms such as deaf and hard of hearing, hearing impaired, phonology, speech impairment, and other key terms. What's the correct terminology to use?
Okay, so the program is Education of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. That's what we call it here at EKU. The state of Kentucky actually, when students graduate from our program, they get a certificate that says Certificate in Hearing Impairment. Hearing impairment is not a culturally sensitive term to use because people who are deaf or hard of hearing don't necessarily view especially if they're a deaf person born from deaf parents, they don't view that as an impairment. They have a shared language. They use ASL and they communicate. And so out of respect, we use people first language, right? So we say persons who are deaf or hard of hearing or a deaf and hard of hearing person. And there is a definition, like for kids to receive services in the school system. Deaf is that the sort of definition of that is that even with assistive listening devices, you're still not able to access spoken language auditorily. So that's really what deafness means. And then hard of hearing, you can have a range of hearing loss from mild all the way down to profound, but you are able to access spoken language and auditory information through your devices, through a cochlear implant or a hearing aid. So that's really the difference between those two terms. And it's just, we kind of just say deaf or hard of hearing because some people will identify as deaf or some people will identify as hard of hearing, but we kind of group them into one category. When you're talking about things like some folks don't consider it an impairment, that would be if they were proficient users of American Sign Language, right? And but about 90 to 95% of children who are born deaf or hard of hearing are born to hearing parents who don't have a background necessarily in ASL. And so then they might make the choice to have their child learn spoken language, right? That's when you get into things like understanding and developing speech skills at a very young age. So the key with deaf and hard of hearing, in order to ensure overall academic success, you really have to focus on early identification and early intervention. And then you can, if you go the route of spoken language, that's when you talk about developing their speech skills. And teachers of the deaf work hand in hand with audiologists and with speech language pathologists who will help to work on those speech and language skills. Ultimately, whether kids are using ASL or they're using spoken language, they're ultimately going to have to learn how to read written English. And so there's a big focus on that and developing those skills to be a literate person in society.
Wow, that sounds very complex. I think back on the story about Helen Keller, who was blind, couldn't speak, and was deaf. And I just can't imagine how difficult that must have been for her to be able to try to assimilate some type of communications through through what she did have, what she did possess.
Yeah, there's a system that's called, I believe it's a Braden system, where you can use tactile clues to help people understand how your forming sounds. And if you can't see how my mouth is being formed or something like that, then you can use actually your hand or a child's hand on your face to help them to feel how your mouth is opening and things like that. So that's highly specialized. The deaf and blind certification, that's a highly specialized field.
Very good. Well, Dr.
Yeah.
Gremp, please tell us a little bit about your program. How many faculty positions do you have, and what specific degree programs or certificates are offered online?
Sure. So I'm really the only full-time faculty member for the program. So I teach the content courses, and then I have some adjuncts that help me with some of the supervision, kind of. So we have so the programs that we have at the graduate level are all online, and so we are really happy to say that we have a certification program, just certification only. So it's a teacher out there in the field somewhere that wants to add deaf and hard of hearing certification. He or she could do that, because I do have males in my program. Then I have certification, and I have the Master of Arts in Education degree in special education with the hearing impaired certification, what it's called, DHH certification. And that's also online. And that one, you get the actual degree, right? So you take all the certification courses, plus you take the core degree programs, which include, there's some research based, and you develop an action research project. And those are across many different degree programs that are online at EKU. And then I'm very excited to say that we just started in the fall to be able to add the deaf and hard of hearing certification to our already well-established MAT program. And so now if we have someone who does not have teaching experience and teaching certification, they were always ineligible for the graduate program. So now what you can do is you can get the Master of Arts in Teaching, which is an initial certification. So your very first teaching certification at that master level, if in deaf and hard of hearing. And so that makes that route a lot quicker than it would be if you were, say you were a history major or something, and you wanted to then teach deaf children. Well, you'd have to go get a teaching certification and then add the deaf and hard of hearing. But now you can do it just in one step. So you can get a Master of Arts in Teaching for deaf and hard of hearing. And so I was really excited that we got that approved at the state level. And we have 2 students in there now, and I've got an open house this week, and there's at least 2 or 3 students registered to hear more about it. So to make a long story short, right, the Master of Arts in Teaching, the MAED, and then the standalone certification of the options that we have online.
Wow. So that MAT program just started in the fall?
Mm-hmm.
Very
It did.
good.
Yeah, it was
Very
added
good.
to, because we have we have a longstanding MAT program with different certifications. So the Master of Arts in Teaching, and you can do elementary, or you can do middle grade science, or whatever it is you wanted to do. But now you can do deaf and hard of hearing. So.
Very good. Well, let me ask you, Dr. Gremp, as you counsel and advise students, where do you see many of them working after graduation? Are they all teachers, or are they in other fields as well? And I guess, in other words, what kinds of skills can students learn, and what kinds of jobs can a graduate expect to land when they earn a degree in this discipline?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, actually, it's interesting because you said, where do they land? Well, lots of times is where they come from. That's interesting as well. So as I mentioned, the MAT is new, and that means that someone who is an interpreter, someone who's a parent of a child who's deaf or hard of hearing and has some other kind of profession, right? Someone who's not been in the field but just has always had a desire can make a change then, and then become a teacher of the deaf, right? And then when they're finished, many of the people that are in the program at the graduate level are already teachers somewhere in the state of Kentucky. And there's a huge shortage of teachers of the deaf nationally. There's a huge shortage. So in my undergraduate program, which is not an online program, I get emails all the time to ask if there are any candidates, any graduates that are interested in going to, Florida or New Mexico or Tennessee or whatever. But at the graduate level, we have a lot of Kentucky students who are going to stay in Kentucky. So we're really trying to recruit from school districts and counties where there's a need. So there are some children who are deaf or hard of hearing, and they don't have a teacher that's trained and specialized in education of the deaf and hard of hearing. So, which is really a disservice because it's a highly specialized field. And if they're only getting services from someone who has not had the coursework, then they're really not getting their educational needs met. So for the most part, they stay in Kentucky, and lots of times they're encouraged by maybe their director of special education or something to go ahead and pursue this because they sort of need it now. It's like real time. They need to kind of on the job training, so to speak. They can end up in a public school system, and then the way they can the roles that they would play within that can vary. So there are some larger counties. So for instance, Jefferson County and Fayette County, where they have schools that they take a cluster of children who are deaf or hard of hearing, and they go to one elementary school and they go to one middle school, sort of like that. And they'll have some time in a classroom with other children who are deaf or hard of hearing. And so you might be, someone might be a teacher in that little self-contained kind of room where the kids are there part of the day. But the other thing that can happen is they can go to work in the public school system and be an itinerant teacher, which means a teacher would travel to different schools within a county. So to one elementary school, to a high school, back to another different elementary school, where there are kids who are deaf or hard of hearing who don't need all day intense instruction from a teacher of the deaf, but they need support in certain content areas. And so they would see them certain number of minutes per week to meet their educational needs, to help them stay on par with their hearing peers in the educational system. And then of course they could work at a school for the deaf. We have just one school for the deaf in Kentucky, but we've had recent graduates end up out there. And then we have one additional option within the DHH certification that's called DHH with sign proficiency. So that just requires candidates to take up an additional test that's put out, it's a national test in ASL. And if they are proficient in that test, then they could actually teach ASL as a world language in a general education setting. So to high school or grade school kids that could teach ASL. So I think it gives teachers a wide variety of options for what it is they want to teach or where they want to teach.
Very good. Now, this next question may be a little odd, but I'm just curious, are many of your students deaf or hard of hearing themselves or speech issues?
Yes, there are a number. I've had a number over the years, and right now I currently have at least I have one student, two students in my undergraduate program, and I have at least two students in the graduate program as well that are themselves deaf. That's so interesting because in online courses we do a lot of collaboration and communication within the class. So we're always asking the students to share, right? To become involved and to communicate, collaborate with one another. And then we have, naturally discussion board kinds of topics. Like, what do you think about this? And the students who are deaf themselves have a great perspective. They've lived through this experience of being maybe the only deaf person in their classroom, or knowing how difficult it is to access information in a noisy classroom or something like that, right? And so they really bring another element and a dynamic to the class that all of the other students really appreciate and benefit from. So, and I think part of it is that they've grown up and they've had struggles, and they want to use the knowledge they've gained to help students just like themselves, because they've lived through it.
Well, this segues really well into the next couple of questions, talking about effective online teaching. I know firsthand, because I've looked at your courses, what an effective instructor you are. And would you please share with our audience tools or approaches that you use to give your students really a rich and meaningful online learning experience.
Well, first of all, we get to work with instructional designers in the eCampus program who are just phenomenal. They really have ideas that if faculty aren't like on the cutting edge of what's the new technology I can use to implement something. I want to do this and I want to be able to share it with my students in this certain way. They're always finding new platforms for us to use. And so I think one of the things I like the best about the courses I've been able to develop is that I don't just take a textbook and say, here's the textbook, let's read through it and then you'll be done. We look for supplemental sources. So we have a foundation in a textbook, right? So you have some chapters that you'll read, but it's much more about experiencing and collaborating and applying your learning. So it's what does this mean? I'm going to learn this terminology, but I'm not memorizing it for the sake of memorizing it. I need to be able to communicate to teachers that don't have the skill level that I have, to parents who, yes, they might have a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, but they've not had any education in the field of, how do you develop language? How do you encourage language at home? How do you help to develop literacy skills? How do you do these kinds of things? So we use, PowerPoints since it's online, I provide. We narrate PowerPoints and then they're always transcribed, right? So that students have access to them. I've gotten a lot of feedback from students when there's a PowerPoint that's not narrated. I would think I would get tired of listening to me, but they enjoy that, right? But I've also used things like there's a wiki feature in our Blackboard site. So but it's just a shared site. You could use Google things as well. To get students to collaborate over a shared sort of case study problem, right? I've used Flipgrid as another great thing that students can use. It's just, you can use it on your phone, but you interact and you post a video message to students in your classroom that are sharing in the classroom. And I look for relevant YouTube videos that really can do just as good of a job as I can, or I try to put it in multiple representations, right? So they'll read something, then I'll have a PowerPoint about it, but then there'll be somebody else that does it in an interesting or entertaining way, right? So that there's lots of mechanisms for people to hear and read and experience the material in multiple ways. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I really like about the online is that we try to make it as interactive as possible. Same thing with grading. Grading is not about a point system, it's about a feedback system. I want you to be the best teacher you can be. And so I'm going to provide you with suggestions and feedback to help you get there, not to penalize you for not knowing the information right away, right? So it's just a growing experience, and my students seem to really appreciate that. They know that they're going to be able to work with me to become to be able to master the material, and that's really what special education is all about. So if I want them to be good special educators, I have to sort of model that behavior where my goal is that you learn the material and let's do this together so that you're successful.
Well, this really segues into the next question, because I'm drilling down a little bit in talking about one of your courses. I know you teach a number of them, but one of them, SED 580/780, Audiology for the Teachers of Hard of Hearing. I noticed that you use a myriad of media, including voiceover PowerPoints, video, a lot of applicable YouTube videos, like you said, a lot of readings. In some of your other courses, I even noticed some animation type things. If you would, talk a little bit about the effectiveness you see in teaching using these kinds of tools. You've kind of hit on it here in a previous question, but how effective do you see this for the students with this myriad of different kinds of media?
Yeah, and I guess I just got excited talking about it to tell you all the things I was doing before you even asked. But so yeah, I do use all of those things. And when you say interactive, animations, I had a instructional designer that helped me with that. So you can set it up so that, there's just like a step-by-step kind of thing, and students will answer a question, and then it goes to a next sort of, sort of a logic puzzle kind of thing, paradigm where students can progress along learning a topic, right? So that they're moving through it, and it's more interactive. And that's one thing that I really like, is an interactive kind of thing. Like I said, PowerPoints are great, and there's a place for them, but they're very linear. So there's a start and a finish. And so if you can present the material in a way that's a different organization, that's more spatial, that you can look at it and be able to focus in on the piece that you didn't quite understand, or that you want to remember again. And one of the things that I've been experimenting with more and more is in the Google Suite, there's a Jamboard kind of application that's really just a big whiteboard, and basically you're sticking Post-its up there, right? So, but you can build lots of creative ideas and add to it, and it's really, you can do it in real time, or you can students can access it, sort of whenever they can, but it's a shared workspace. And so I really like that idea of being able to have a collaborative project that the students are working on. And, all students say they hate group work, but if you set it up the right way, and it's not, that I think people hate group work because they always feel like there's going to be someone that's holding them up, right? They can't finish the assignment because they're waiting on someone. But if you design it and work carefully with, that's what I did with instructional designers, is work carefully with it so that students are doing independent work, but that their independent work works together to make a bigger piece, but that one piece doesn't depend on the other, and that they do get, credit for what they're doing fairly, right? And so it's all about making sure that you're fair in your grading. And like I said, mine is not about a grade so much as it is about demonstrating your understanding of the content. And if you need to do that more than once, that's okay, because lots of times I've had to do things more than once to get it right. So, but yeah, I think it's all about finding the software and the applications that allow interaction among students and with myself and with the students.
Well, I've noticed, as you've been talking about online teaching, that you get very excited. It seems like you're very passionate about that. What do you enjoy most about teaching online?
I would not have, I didn't know what to expect, because I had not taught online until I got here at EKU. I really do like it. I feel like it's personal. It's because you can make comments to students, on their work, or in just the grading section. And they know that you've paid attention to it, right? That it's right there. They know, whereas sometimes if you collect a lot of papers, you're just grading them and sending them back. But I think you can get more of a personal relationship with your students, because you can say something directed at them and the whole class doesn't have to hear it, right? It's just between you and that candidate, that person. We call them candidates because they're getting ready to get certified. But I can say, it looks like you're having trouble with this. You want to contact me and we can set up a call and I'll help you with this. Or you did a great job on this. You should be really proud, and I'm pleased at how well you understand this. Well, everyone likes to have that personal relationship, and I just think it allows you to do that, and takes away that uncomfortable feeling for students if they don't like participating in a big group. So and I really do find that the students will often, I'll make a comment on something in Blackboard and I'll get an email that says, I saw that you said such and such, so they're paying attention to the comments that you write. And I feel like the students that are in my program have the nearly equal passion that I have for teaching children who are deaf or hard of hearing. So if I can make sure that I emit that to them, then they're going to be better teachers. So yeah, I can't help it. I really like it.
I'm going to change directions here just for a second because this next question really interests me. It's my understanding you have the ability, that you personally have the ability to award a scholarship to special education students. So my question is, what are the criteria that are used to determine the winner?
So actually, we've been able to secure through grant funding from the WHAS Crusade for Children for a number of years running now. We've received a grant to offer scholarships to students in special education at the graduate level. So it's not just deaf and hard of hearing, it's our other areas of special education. And there's an application process that there's a notification that goes out, and then the students complete an application, and it's your standard thing. We ask for things like grade point average, but at the graduate level, they're all working hard, right? So, but it's also there's some short answer or small essay questions, sort of like, tell us about your background, tell us why you're interested in special education. What does special education mean to you? And we have a committee that reviews those, and we try to do our best to give at least a smaller amount, even if we have to a larger number of students, because we know that a lot of our graduate students many of them are paying for this, out of their own salaries and their own budgets. And so they're very appreciative. We always get emails that say, it was maybe 500 this year, or maybe it was 1,000 this year, but those amounts just really add up. And so they really are pleased with that. And we're very proud that we've been able to obtain that funding for so many years in a row.
Very good. Very good. I'm going to shift gears just a bit here again. And this is probably maybe a deeply personal question, but I'm very interested in it. What are your thoughts, Dr. Gremp, about the treatment of the deaf and hard of hearing in our society today? I mean, is there still a stigma about, and I may be calling this wrong, about this disability or this hard of hearing or deaf status? Are they treated equally to the hearing population when it comes to things like career choices?
Yeah, unfortunately not. Well, I think it is that there's a lack of knowledge, public knowledge about deafness and deaf and hard of hearing, and there's a false impression that if you're deaf, you can't speak. That's not true, right? And then there's the other part of our culture that equates speech with intelligence. And so it's really language that we're talking about, language and literacy and being a literate person that allows you to be successful. But as a culture, if there are any barriers to communicating with someone, it's too much effort, right? We might not want to put forth the effort to figure out how am I going to communicate with this person. And so I think sometimes they're disadvantaged. I think one of the best things that's come out of COVID is that there is a lot more captioning going on in the world. And so I feel like that's just wonderful because, I've noticed when people wear a mask that I have a hard time understanding what they're saying, right? And lip reading is really not, you can't get information, 100% of information. In fact, you can get less than half of information just trying to lip read alone if you didn't have access to the auditory signal as well. And so I think the way deaf and hard of hearing people are treated is, they if they're using sign language, they speak a different language, they don't talk, they mustn't be as intelligent as me. And that is absolutely not true, right? It's just that they speak a different language than you or I. And so it's all about access and equity, right? So they might need an interpreter if they use sign language and not spoken language to communicate with you, but they also can read and write and need the opportunity. They need obviously explicit and specialized instruction to reach those levels, but they have the intellectual capacity to do that. We just have to figure out how to teach them. And so I think that society does not do a good job, just like we do not do a good job with a lot of disabilities. But I think it's misunderstood, and it's a low incidence population, which means there's not it's not a high incidence disability in terms of how many people that, you're going to run into on a given day that have a hearing loss, right? Or deaf or hard of hearing. So I just think it's a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication. But I think there's a lot of people that are willing to help change that, and people that are receptive. It's just that they don't know.
I recently read this very interesting article. It's from December 2020. So it's just a few weeks old.
Mhm.
And it was from Tel Aviv University. And there's some scientists who are experimenting with gene therapy to quote unquote cure deafness. Now, the World Health Organization believes there are about 500 million people with hearing impairments or deafness worldwide. First off, which astounded me that they would think that there were that many people
Right.
With that. What are your thoughts about such a cure, if in fact that really is what it is?
Okay, well, I actually did happen to have seen that same article, but it is, what they're talking about in this is it's a gene therapy, so it's designed to go in, if they know that a child has a certain has a certain genetic predisposition for a certain type of hearing loss, so and it's a progressive hearing loss, so they're born and they can hear. Right. And so then, but over time they would lose their hearing. So they can go in and proactively do something to the genes to prevent the deterioration. Right. So that would work for a smaller population of all the hearing impaired people, because genetic causes of deafness account for about half of deafness, but not all of it. And so some of it we just don't know. There's no gene marker that can say that's why the person was born with a hearing loss. It just happens sometimes. So in that case, the other type of research that's been going on for years, and it's just really complicated and technical, is so the way hearing works is that, you have your outer ear that collects your sound. You have the middle ear, which is, just on the other side of your eardrum. And then, so you have all this sound, and then it goes to the third spot, which is your inner ear, where there's this little cochlea that's lined with hair cells. And the hair cells actually receive the sound signals, and they make neurotransmitter kind of signals to the auditory nerve, and it goes to your brain. So what happens with a sensory neural or inner ear hearing loss is those hair cells are either missing or damaged. And so the way to cure deafness is to regenerate those hair cells. So make them grow again. And that's where the trick is, like, how long is that going to take us? They've been trying to do it in mice. They've been trying to do it in amphibians. They've been trying to do it in small mammals. And they have, some limited success in some areas, but it's still a ways off before adult humans that they can do regenerate hair cells. But that's what it's going to take. And even then, will it be available to every person who's deaf or hard of hearing? Will it work for every person who's deaf or hard of hearing? Probably not. So I'm always excited to see these new, medical treatments that can provide, some good outcomes for some of the population, but there's not one golden ticket yet for actually curing deafness.
Well, speaking about research, I'm curious, what are your research interests, Dr. Gremp?
So my research interests are really what can happen in a classroom of children who are deaf or hard of hearing to improve their literacy outcomes. Because if you have good reading and writing skills, the sky's the limit, right? You can be successful. And so one of the things I'm most interested in is this idea of working memory and of sequential memory, right? So that, because everything we do, if you think about it in literacy, is based on a sequence of events. You have to be able to hold things in your memory and remember what happened first, next, last. That, it starts out with narratives like that, but it's really true. Language is based on predictable sequence. word order in our sentences and things like that. And so being able to develop those skills to a level of automaticity. So what happens is if you have struggling readers, they're always struggling with the code. They can't break the code. They need to decode the words. And then they need to put the sentences together and figure out what they mean. If they're spending all their energy on that piece of it, they lose the idea that's behind the written words. And so you really have to work on that decoding. And then the other area you have to work on is the language, because the English language has the crazy way that you can have the same meaning and you can move words around in the sentence so that they look very, very different, but then the meaning is the same. So for instance, if I said, the bear chased the lion, you can get a picture in your head. And if I say the lion was chased by the bear, I moved the words all around in that sentence. It doesn't look like the same sentence, but the picture in my brain is still the same. So you have to help kids understand language. And so my research is interested in how can we develop those automatic skills when it comes to remembering and recalling things so that we can really focus on the meaning and not the task itself.
That's fascinating. Have you been working on that a long time?
I've been working on it. I worked on it all through my dissertation. I worked on it a little bit in the grant I was on it in Georgia. And here, I've really focused more on the impact I can make on my students, the graduate students and the undergraduate students that I have. But I'm very much hoping that I can, I have some relationships with some of the schools. I'm very much hoping to get back into being able to get into the classrooms and do some of that. So maybe someday when I get a sabbatical, I'll be able to try that again.
Very good. Well, as we begin to wrap up here, would you tell our listeners a little bit about what your personal interests are? What is it you like to do in your spare time?
Oh,
If you have spare time.
I don't have a whole lot, but I really do like to read. And I will say that, that I have, I've made it a priority that I always have a library book and I'm reading something all the time. And now I'm kind of into the thing where I've gotten those lists of 100 best books or this or that. So classics that I've never read before, I like to read. I really like to bake. So pies are my favorite thing to bake. I find it really calming and therapeutic. My children like pies too. So, but, and then the thing I really like the best is being a grandma. So we have a grandson that's going to be 2 in March and I like to, they're out of town. So my husband and I moved to Kentucky for this job. So I have 2 sons in St. Louis, one is moving to New York today and one that's in Austin, Texas. And so I don't see them all the time, but when I can see my family, that's probably when I'm happiest, is when I'm around my kids and now my grandson. So, and I love flowers and gardening, even gardening, like flower gardening and gardening, like vegetable gardening. But all that stuff takes time and sometimes time is hard to find.
Well, Dr. Gremp, we want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you and getting to know you a little bit better. And it's been really interesting learning more about this really vital, important work with the education of the deaf and hard of hearing program here at EKU. And I just want to thank you so much for your time. We've really appreciated it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. You can kind of hear that I like the program a little bit. So, and it's really the only deaf and hard of hearing program in the state. So I feel blessed to be here, and I really am happy that I have the opportunity to have so many great students in the program. So thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you.